Wow, it has been a few months since I have talked to you about Planescape, Adventures in the Multiverse, the newest setting from Wizards of the Coast's Dungeons and Dragons 5th edition. First of all, let me apologize. I did a review of Sigil and the Outlands way back in November, and I told you I'd have a review out for the rest of the books fairly soon, and wouldn't you know it, now it's January. I'd love to blame the holidays, or having 3 kids in general, or just life getting in the way, but the truth is, actually, that's the truth. But I've been busy in the meantime. You see, as I've read this setting, I have learned that I am 100% in love with it. So much so, in fact, that I went to the Dungeon Masters Guild and got print on demand of all of these Planescape books, and I have more coming. This setting freaking rules. I know it's been out for a long time, but I didn't get into Dungeons and Dragons until 3rd edition, where the Planescape setting was eventually sort of discontinued, I guess. Not really. It existed still within the book somewhere, but it wasn't really called out as a setting of its own. So I'm catching up, and I'm loving it. All that aside, today I'm going to continue my review of 5th edition's Adventures in the Multiverse setting. And today, we're specifically going to talk about 2 items that came in that slipcase. The first is going to be Morte's Planar Parade, the monster manual for Planescape 5th edition. The second is we're going to talk about the Dungeon Master screen. What a strange thing to talk about, right? It's just a DM screen. Who cares? Well, I certainly do. So, let's go ahead and start talking about it. Wait, hold on. Before we do, I must disclaim. It's time for him to disclaim. Disclaimers. The first thing you should know is that Wizards of the Coast sent me this slipcase for free, as well as another copy as well. Now, there is absolutely no rule or agreement between me and Wizards of the Coast that I must review this. I don't have to talk about it. I'm not getting paid to do so. They just sent me a copy of Planescape, Adventures in the Multiverse for free because, well, they thought I might enjoy it, and they were right. Thanks, Wizards of the Coast. The second disclaimer I want to give is these are just my opinions on the setting. Again, I didn't get into the setting until very recently, so I don't have a lot of the same memories, some people might call it baggage, that others do from when they played this setting back in the 1990s. So if you are a very old fan of Planescape and you're looking for me to give a nuanced review between the differences of older Planescape and the current iteration, I'm sorry, I'm just not that guy. I don't have the backlog of knowledge that you do. But if you're looking for my opinions on 5th edition Planescape, well, you've come to the right place. Okay. With those 2 disclaimers out of the way, let's get started. Get to the point, man. What's in the book? So let's start off with Morte's Planar Parade, the monster manual of this set. It's not a very thick monster manual, but that's to be expected when it's one of 3 books in a slipcase, so just in case anybody's wondering about that. Now, this book is packed full of a lot of useful information for running monsters in a Planescape setting. The very first chapter is the introduction. In the introduction, we get some information as to what petitioners are, which is basically the spirits of the dead from, either the Planescape setting or prime material planes that have moved on to their next phase in, I guess their next spiritual phase. Petitioners are not really player characters. They're really more of just denizens that are kind of tossed around that have kind of encapsulated some sort of planar ideal in life and then have been rewarded or punished in death. We then move on to a series of modifications for existing creatures that are in this book or outside of this book. The idea is that each plane has an influence on creatures that dwell there, and this influence kind of comes into play, at least mechanically, as different abilities, whether they be passive or active, that you can add to monsters to give them a little more flavor. This reminds me a ton of the templates that we used to see back in 3.0 and 3.5. So for instance, if you wanted to have a celestial badger, you wouldn't just create an entirely new monster, you'd take the celestial template and then apply it to the badger. This came up a lot, especially in summoning creatures for spellcasters. So I love that they put that in here, so that way we can start modifying monsters on the sly, rather than having to, go out and buy a whole new book filled with hundreds and hundreds of stat blocks just to represent this same creature in this plane, and then the same creature in this plane, and this, it would get annoying. So I love the template idea. After the templates, we get a series of random encounters by planes. Now, these are not gigantic, comprehensive lists of random encounters. Usually the lists have, I think 5 entries per plane of existence, but I'm okay with that. It's really just an idea to get us started on the road to what the players might experience when they're traveling through these planes. The rest of this book is dedicated to stat blocks. There are 53 stat blocks put into this book, and most of them, but not all, are dedicated to Outsiders. Outsiders was a former classification for NPCs and monsters back in 3.0 and 3.5, which would represent anybody who was not directly from the material plane. We have since moved on from that, and now we have classifications like Celestial and Fiend and Construct, although Construct did exist before, but there was outsider constructs, ones that weren't from around here, like the Modrons. And then we have Aberrations, but back in the day, the old days, there was one classification for pretty much all of these called the Outsider with little subtypes. Either way, I'm just letting you know there's a lot of outsider type creatures in this book. That'll be your Aberrations, your Fiends, and your Celestials. There's also a fair amount of humanoids, because the very back of the book is dedicated, like many monster manuals in 5th edition, to NPC stat blocks, which typically are just humanoids, right? But in this particular case, we are getting faction members. You remember the different factions of Sigil? We have stat blocks in this book to represent your average members. A lot of them get kind of 2 stat blocks per, the low ranking and then the mid to high ranking members. The breakdown of this is we've got, 15 Celestials, so many Celestials, which was absolutely needed, in my opinion. Celestials have had very few stat blocks to represent them. We pretty much got a list of Archons, in the original monster manual, and there's been kind of slim picking since. We also have 15 humanoids. That would be the Planescape NPCs. Beyond the Celestials and humanoids, we also get 7 Aberrations, 7 Fiends, 6 Constructs, and 4 new dragons. Now, if you did the math there, you may have realized that I named 54 numbers. That's because one of the creatures, the Planar Incarnate, kind of a living embodiment of a plane, is either a Celestial or Fiend, depending on what plane of existence they embody. Now, most of these stat blocks kind of live in that sweet spot of Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition, where the monsters have a CR of 5 to 13, which, in my opinion, is where the game of 5th edition Dungeons & Dragons really shines. And for me, Planescape is a great setting, but it's not a setting that I would want to toss level 1 Burks into. Get it? I use planar chant here. Haha. Okay, anyway, it's not a place I'd want to put really low-level characters in. Not that you can't do it, it's just not what I would do. Now, some of the monster stat blocks are going to be about the planes at large. Some of them are specifically for Sigil. For instance, there are the Daebus, the strange, ashen-skinned servitors of the Lady of Pain who sort of float around the city fixing things and scolding people, as well as cranium rats, which are psionic rats with their brains exposed, and they're kind of just a general nuisance at large. Imagine rats that knew how to adapt to what you were doing and could also read your mind. With each stat block, we also get art for every single creature that's in there. Well, with the exception of the NPCs, they don't give one for each one of those. Although it would be kind of nice if we started to see that a little more often. But because people are generally so varied, I understand why they don't. Tons of great artists contributed to this book. I know that there's a kind of a feeling that if it's not, Tony DiGiulizzi, then is it really Planescape? But I have been looking through a lot of these older Planescape books that I got off of DM's Guild, and he wasn't the only artist working on it. I love his art, and I love to see it included right here on the cover. Check out this Githyanki. But there's always been multiple artists working on Planescape, and it's great to see so many different artists get a chance to have their art in this book. Okay, I want to talk about real quick what I liked about this book, what I have iffy feelings on, and what I didn't like about this book. Things this effing GM lacks. What did I love about this book? Well, first of all, I love the customization options. I already mentioned before about the templates back in 3.0 and 3.5. They were a great way to modify monsters. The problem with those templates were that there was just too much. You were basically remaking the monster when you would apply a template. It wasn't quite as difficult as making something from scratch, but it was a lot of modifications. The modifications for 5th edition that have been presented in Morte's Planar Parade are pretty simple. Like 1 or 2 abilities, maybe some resistances, and you're good to go. It gives the feeling of having a creature, special creature from that particular plane of existence, but without having to go through the, entire process of starting from scratch. It's pretty quick. I could probably add these features on in about a minute tops if I chose to write it down. Okay, what else did I like? Well, all right, one of my very favorite creature types have been added in, the Demodans. They are sort of kind of in that space between neutral evil and chaotic evil. So you have the Yugoloths who are neutral evil, and you have the demons who sort of represent chaotic evil, and the Demodans sort of exist in between. They're from the plane of Carcery, the prison plane. I love Demodans. I mean, any sort of demon-like creature that turns into puddles of ink, well, I just think that's fun. Also, we got Guardians. Guardians are, as Archons are to lawful good, Guardians are to neutral good. They are the truest of good Celestials. And it's nice to see a Celestial represented that's not just, lawful good angel. I'm happy to see that. And, I think one of them is like a big horse guy. That's kind of funny. I don't know why that's funny, but giant horse people always make me laugh. Bojack Horseman, the Cardinal. Another thing I really enjoy is kind of on the same line as Celestials. Celestials have been really expanded in Morte's Planar Parade. They do not only cover the good side of the planar spectrum or the alignment spectrum, but they also cover a lot of the neutral outsiders as well. Now, at first, I was a little put off by this because, why didn't they just make a third type? Fiends for evil, Celestials for good, and then a neutral type. And then I thought, the thing about neutrality is that it's so varied because most people, in my opinion, and most creatures would kind of fall in that neutral spectrum. So expanding Celestials, not a bad idea. Plus, we never have enough Celestials added in. I mean, how often do your players go up against Celestials? Probably pretty rarely because, usually we're supposed to be the good guys. So I'm okay with this decision. And speaking of neutral outsiders, the Modrons have been expanded to include a lot more than just the original 5 we found in the Monster Manual. So they've got a kind of a sleek upgrade. I have taken a look at some of the older art from Planescape on the Modrons, and there's a lot of great art out there, but there's some that I didn't quite agree with. I like the shift towards really making them seem more robotic rather than strangely humanoid. That's a personal preference, and this isn't to disparage any artist who's ever worked on this. I just have a personal preference, and I like the giant robot aspects, especially when they're not all just humanoid, and there's a bunch of really weird-looking constructs coming out of the plane of Mechanus, so I'm all for that. Speaking of things that I'm all for, we've got dragons. Time dragons. Big, giant dragons. I'm always about dragons. This time, they're holding hourglasses. I'm pretty sure they don't all hold hourglasses at all times, but I like the idea that maybe they have like a sacred hourglass that each of these planar time dragons have. I don't know, whatever. We get dragons of time. Dragons, kind of embodying concepts, is a big thing in D&D. It's been around for quite a while. It's not just about what color of evil or what metal of good are you. We start to get into the concept dragons, and time dragons are, dragons kind of based around the concept of how time flows, and how in Planescape, time isn't necessarily as linear as one would expect to find on, say, the prime material plane. So, more dragons. I'm looking forward to getting a miniature from WizKids on that one. I'm gonna probably purchase that one, although if they want to send one to me for free, I would not say no. Probably my favorite thing about this book is not what it included, but rather what it omitted. There is not a stat block for the Lady of Pain in Morte's Planar Parade. That is a great idea. The Lady of Pain is this enigmatic figure that nobody truly understands, and my belief is that when you create a stat block, you give a level of understanding that people can kind of suss things out simply by testing it out. Let's fight the Lady of Pain, see what we can find out, right? And generally speaking, if you create a stat block for something, there's a good chance someone at some table is going to try to attack it. I know that there are many who do not believe that you create a stat block for a good NPC, and that doesn't mean players are going to try to kill it. Look, all I'm saying is eventually somebody tries to. Having a stat block for the Lady of Pain would give concrete information about her out there that I don't think needs to be. I think that to kind of build up the idea that she is an unknowable entity, you have to reinforce that through the rules, and in this case by not having rules for it. And I thought that was a great choice, a solid design choice. I know not everybody's going to find that popular, but for me, if I need a stat block, sure, I'll whip something up, but I rather like the implication that I'm not supposed to, that the Lady of Pain doesn't have a stat block. She's not just, a big bad evil gal hanging out in a castle waiting for the players to get through her dungeon to get to her. I like the idea that she is an unknowable entity, not only to my players, but also to me as well. Now for the things that he found iffy. Okay, let's talk about some of the things that I'm a little iffy on. The chaotic good outsiders. Okay, so back in the day, the Eladrin were basically the chaotic good outsider. When 4th edition came about, the Eladrin became a player race. They kind of became the stand-in for your high elf. And in 5th edition, while the high elf has returned, the Eladrin have still kind of remained as kind of a player race, like a Fey player race. They exist in kind of a weird in between where maybe they're outsiders or maybe they're a strange planar race that your DM lets you take that embodies the seasons. I don't know. Eladrin have had a weird position in the game, I think, for a while now, and I kind of miss the fact that they used to be the chaotic good outsider choice, your celestial for freedom, right? But we no longer have that. And, kind of looking through all of 5th edition, I don't really feel that they have put forth a replacement. And we really haven't seen a replacement since 4th edition. So I was a little disappointed to see that. One weird little structure thing about the book. So in the first chapter, we get a collection of random encounters by specific plane. At the very end of the book, we get another list of random encounters by alignment plane. So, first you have random encounters for Carcery and Mechanus and the Abyss and such. And then you get planes of evil, planes of chaos, planes of law, the encounter table. I wish they would have put them together rather than dividing it out to front of the book, back of the book. It's just a little odd to me to have to kind of flip back and forth to decide what random encounter table I want to use rather than just having it in one place. That's just a organizational issue I have. It's not a big deal, just something I noticed. This FNGM has a bone to pick. All right, what didn't I like about this book? First of all, where are the brand new races or ancestries to play in the game? That actually got to me. A lot of us were hoping for a new Modron playable race. We didn't get it. Also, the whole plane of Sigil is filled with a new type of people called the Barrier, and the Barrier are kind of like your centaurs, but rather than being large horse people, they're medium-sized goat people, and there are tons of them in Planescape, and we didn't get a stat block for it. It's actually very, very frustrating. Now, I suppose if one were to have to homebrew this, the Modrons could, I guess, probably be represented by either the Autognomes from the Spelljammer setting or maybe the Warforged from the Eberron setting, but I still feel like we should have gotten something for that. The Barrier, there's actually a weirdly easy fix. In one of the books, and I cannot remember for the life of me right now which one it is. Wait, yes I can! It's Mordenkainen Presents Monsters of the Multiverse. In this book, which included a ton of new playable races, we ended up getting a playable race called the Centaur. We know centaurs, I just mentioned them, horse people. But oddly, they were medium-sized, and this caused somewhat of a controversy. Well, okay, no, I can totally understand that. It's kind of weird to have this large race only be represented by a medium player race. I get it, we don't want players playing large races. We had the same issue with the Minotaur. But, fun fact, the Centaur race as presented here in this book could work really well as the Barrier. So there is a fix, but I kind of feel like we deserved a little more. Also, with this book being called Monsters of the Multiverse, I kind of would have expected a lot more Planescape material. I mean, there's tons of stuff that can be used, don't get me wrong, but it's, I don't know, it seems kind of odd that we had Monsters of the Multiverse, then we didn't get Planescape released later, but that's a whole separate issue. The second big issue I had with this is the lack of factal stat blocks. Now, factals are the leaders of the factions in Planescape, and in the older Planescape rules, these were many of them were near mythic level people, like the best of the best, right? Real high level cutters, right? These guys, hey, I used the chant again. You know, many of them being upwards of level 20 or so. In this book, we get some stat blocks for kind of low to mid-level threats, right? Or low to mid-level NPC stat blocks. And if we look back at Sigil and the Outlands, and they mention some of the factals, they offer stat blocks, but for the most part, it's just the kind of mid-level NPCs that we find in Morte's Planar Parade. I really thought that we would have gotten some individual stat blocks for each of these factals. You know, we have seen in books including this one, you know, stat blocks for demon lords. We've seen stat blocks for specific devils that rule the 9 hells, or at least serve the 9 hells. But you know, so these are really important NPCs in the lore of the game, and I personally think that for Planescape, some of the most important NPCs are those factals, and I would have loved to see stat blocks for each individual one. Maybe they ran out of room, or maybe they felt it wasn't necessary, but me personally, I think it would have been great to include. Okay, and those are my thoughts on Morte's Planar Parade. I suppose I should have mentioned that kind of in the same style as Xanathar's Guide to Everything, we do get a lot of commentary in this book from a creature named Morte. Morte, you might remember from the Planescape video game, Planescape Torment. Now, we are led to believe that Morte may be a Mimir, at least he shows up that way in the adventure that came with the Adventures in the Multiverse, but we're not really sure exactly what Morte is. I think it's kind of delightful that we get a little callback to one of the most popular video games that has been associated with Dungeons & Dragons of pretty much all time. You know, it's kind of a delightful throwback to that. But otherwise, I don't, you know, when it comes to the commentary running throughout the book, it's kind of amusing, I suppose, but it's not strictly necessary for me. Now, granted, it does give us a good example of how the special language of Planescape can be used, so I guess that's kind of nice, but it's a gimmick a lot of these books use, and And now for the moment you've all been waiting for. Okay, the next thing I want to talk about, I had no plans on talking about it, and that's the DM screen that came with Adventures in the Multiverse. Now, it's a DM screen. I had no plans on saying anything about it, but right before I sat down to record this video, I actually opened it up and took a look, and I was somewhat blown away. Now, I enjoy a good DM screen, right? For almost every game I have, you know, we got Spelljammer, we've got Pathfinder First Edition, I've got Level Up A5E, and I've got Legend of the Five Rings. I love having a solid DM screen at the table to, if nothing else, hide my dice and miniatures that I'm about to throw down on the table. And, you know, if I'm lucky, these Game Master or Dungeon Master screens have a lot of useful information in it, but for the most part, I'm so used to not having good information that I tend to just ignore it. You may notice that I didn't show the Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition, the first one that came out, in my little pile. That's because, well, number one, I lent it to somebody, so I have no idea where it is, but number two, I didn't really find it that useful. I didn't use it very often at all. I've tended to move towards, you know, a wooden DM screen that I add my own sheets to. You know, when it comes to a new setting, a good DM screen can help, though, make the setting feel alive. And the Spelljammer one, The art on this is gorgeous. I'm not going to pretend like it's not. It is absolutely gorgeous. What a great image to put out there. But there are a lot of problems I had with it. I only have room for one DM screen in front of me when I'm going to run a game, and so I need that screen to have good information if I really want to use it. Otherwise, it has to have a picture that blows everything out of the water. And while the picture on the Spelljammer one was decent, the information inside just really didn't help a lot. We get a couple of useful things like, hey, how to set a DC, skills and associated abilities. We get some rules on suffocating and weightlessness. We get some, kind of a map of the Spelljammer universe, but not really, because we know it's so filled with things that it's hard to use. We get some random encounter tables, and then we get this half this DM screen is based around having encounters on a ship and how ships work. The problem is that the Spelljammer setting didn't come with rules really for ship combat. Pretty much the way that it was presented was, hey, here's some idea with how ship combat might work, but overall you really shouldn't do that, and it's better just to jump on deck and fight people. And that's it. And it was really disappointing. I'm just gonna say it out loud. That was super disappointing. When I went to the Planescape setting, or not Planescape, my apologies, the Spelljammer setting, I was really excited to have, adventures in sea space, right? And instead of what we got is just, here's the same battle location over and over again, just use this ship's deck. Okay, whatever, I guess. I don't know, that was disappointing. So I just assumed, like an idiot, that the Planescape DM screen would be filled with just as information. I figured it would just be a thing that I would use to show off some absolutely gorgeous Tony DiTerlizzi art, which it does have with the Lady of Pain right here in the middle. I really do like this art. I think it's fantastic, especially when you notice that there's this teeny tiny little Modron guy. Did you see him? Yeah, there he is. The Duodrone, the one with an eye patch. Look at that guy. Look at him. Of course, it sucks that we didn't get any stat blocks to use him with, but whatever. I think this is great art. But when I took a look inside, I realized that this DM screen has a ton of useful information in it. We've got basically how turns work, long jumps and high jumps, which I always get mixed up. We've got how concentration works. We have rules for cover, obscured areas, damage by level and severity. Damage by level and severity is probably the most useful table when it comes to improvising damage at the table. But not only do we get that, we also get object hit points and object armor class, skills and associated abilities just like we got before, setting DC just like we got before, but we also got exhaustion, and then we have a whole list of conditions. So none of this really has anything to do with Planescape. It's just telling us how the rules work, and these are important things to have at your fingertips. Then the last half are useful tables about the planes themselves. We get a list of all the gate town names and what plane of existence they are associated with. We get a list of the factions of Sigil, so you can remember what they are. We get a list of the wards of Sigil. We get random encounters in Sigil, random encounters in the Outlands, and then we get a whole table of just random planar portal quirks. This is a really useful game master screen. This actually has information I would use at my table to run a Planescape game. This is important. Look, I know it's weird for me to get on a little soapbox about this, but if you're out there considering making a game master screen for your table, if I may toss in my opinion, first of all, do the landscape mode rather than the portrait mode. I don't need it super tall. I need it stable and to cover a wider area. So landscape mode is going to be great. Second, make sure that the game master screen that you create includes the rules for how to improvise within the rule set, right? So we're talking damage, appropriate damage by level or threat. We're talking, a breakdown of like skill DCs and kind of what would be good for like easy, medium, hard, or impossible. Give us the tools that we need to improvise. Those are the things I don't want to have to open up a book to find. If I have to open up a book to improvise, I'm already not really improvising very well. Nothing makes a game master seem more competent than being able to come up with something off the top of their head. And if the game master screen is a tool for game masters, then it needs to fit that purpose, give them that ability, empower them. And I honestly think that out of all the game master screens I have seen for Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition, the Planescape one is thus far the most useful. And that's just the half. the other half is just also really great for keeping my mind where it needs to be when we're running Planescape. What a weird thing for me to get excited about.
He's right. That was weird. We better end this quick.
Okay, that's it for today. I will be taking a look at the adventure that was included in the box set Turn of Fortune's Wheel, but I'm not going to be doing that today. There's a lot to digest. I have read it, and I have a lot of thoughts on it, but I'm kind of holding off a little bit till I discuss those thoughts with you. I'm not going to promise this time that I'll have it out there in 2 weeks. Clearly, I can't be trusted on that account, but I will make sure that I make a commitment to not waiting 4 more months until I talk about it. Anyway, I want to thank you for being here and listening to my thoughts on the Planescape 5th edition slipcase. I would love to hear what you think of the slipcase as well. If you've got it and you've read through it, let me know your thoughts in the comments below. I would love to see them. And otherwise, I don't know. I guess I should mention that, hey, I'm on Twitter. At thisfngm. I also have a Patreon, which I am putting in some interesting stuff, such as a Planescape adventure I'm working on creating myself. You can find the link for that below as well. I use the funds for the Patreon to help fund making videos like this, also help to, pay for things like better shelves. I don't know if you noticed, but I got better shelves. I also got a haircut, but that comes from my own pocket. All that stuff aside, thank you so much for being here and hearing me out. And yeah, let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Otherwise, I look forward to seeing you next time. Have a good one.
End.